Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I got to record this on Thursday afternoon-ish because supposedly a product's showing up today for review, and I'm going to try to get that out this weekend. I don't know if I'll be able to. I don't know if I'll hit any snags in testing like sometimes happens, but I figured I would do this a little bit early, and that way I could hopefully have a cool review out for you this weekend, but if not, next week at the latest. But anyway, let's jump right in. Chris Frank had a bunch of very nice things to say. Thank you very much. And then a question, do I know of any good capture cards that are around $100 that are mostly compatible with the OSSC? And if so, what would you recommend? If you have a desktop computer, not a laptop, I would highly recommend the DataPath Vision cards. You could get them used on eBay for around $100. They're all half-height cards. They were shipped with half-height brackets, so you might have to 3D print a bracket or buy one extra separately somewhere. There's files available to do that, but they're compatible with the OSSC, but the only problem is they don't accept audio. So I believe I added this to the Amazon store, but I found a HDMI audio extracting box that extracts the audio to left-right audio through a 3.5 millimeter jack, optical, and coax. So every kind of audio output you would want. And the only issues I've really had with the DataPath cards are any kind of higher resolution signals. So sometimes 720, but mostly 1080p. I would occasionally get green speckles, and putting this box between them, I was able to run a 50-foot HDMI cable into this box, into a 2-foot HDMI cable into the DataPath, and that made it pretty much perfect. So I'm able to capture fully uncompressed up to 1080p and really just get everything I could possibly need out of it and break the audio out to different capture devices as well. So if you need the HDMI audio extractor, if you need a separate audio device, which you could use whatever's built into your PC, of course, but it would probably be a little more than 100. But that's, in my opinion, at least throughout all of my testing, the best solution that I found. But if you're just looking for a capture card, you just want something that can capture the OSSC, and you're using it for streaming, or basically you don't need a perfect signal. You're not doing side-by-side comparisons or archiving footage or anything like that. That blue box that Voltar found a while back is hit or miss. So I would definitely buy it from a reseller that allows you to return it. But they're less than $100 everywhere, and they were able to take all the signals that I fed it. Now, it does scale the image to 1080p, which means you should probably feed it a 4 or 5x signal from the OSSC out to it. But to be honest, I mean, while there are certain nitpicks I had about it, for the price and the compatibility, I thought it was awesome. Once again, though, when you have generic boxes like that, it's very common that there's multiple motherboard revisions inside. And I've gotten a ton of comments saying, oh, I bought this little blue box and it's totally fine. And I've gotten a handful of others that said it didn't work at all for me. I must have gotten a bad revision. What I'm also looking for is what's in the middle of that. I know a few years from now, when prices come down, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of awesome $100 devices. But what I'd really like to know is what's in the middle. What's a device that's preferably USB or Thunderbolt, so you could use it across all laptops and desktops. What can do 1080p with no color compression, or at the very least, what can do up to 720p with no color compression, but still take 1080p. So that way, if you really want retro stuff at the full color space, you could just capture it at a lower resolution. And of course, what's compatible with Super Nintendo and Nintendo through the OSSC. And I'm still kind of looking for that. I've had hit or miss with Elgato and AverMedia, although I have not tried some of the newer AverMedia stuff. Some of the more expensive stuff will work. So while I could answer half of your question, if you have a desktop and you don't mind just a little bit of setup, then the DataPaths are perfect. Used, of course. But I don't have the other half of that. What if you don't have a PC? What if you have a laptop? And what's a good, fully compatible medium solution to this? I'm not really sure. So if you're on a laptop, try the blue box. And if it doesn't work, make sure you buy it from a place that could return it. If you have a desktop, try the DataPath. And I'm going to keep looking for that middle solution. And as soon as I find it, I will absolutely do a post, and probably a video, but at least a post on it as well, just because I'm really looking for something like that myself. Robert Dickinson was just following up to the question about last week and how to convert different sync signals and what happens if you have multiple G-SCARTs. And Robert said they do have a fully populated G-SCART switch 3.4, but not the latest revision. So they might need to listen to the reply a few times to fully grasp the info. If you're looking to upgrade and get a second G-SCART, the only thing you would really need to know is buy the latest version. Make sure wherever it is, I think the best way to do it would be to have the older version, the 3.4, have a bunch of consoles plugged into that, plug that into the new one, and let the new one go out to your display, and then just make sure to have the PlayStation 2 plugged into the new one. And on the original, turn off sync regeneration or sync stripping and just leave it on the new one. And that way the original 3.4 that you own essentially just becomes a pass-through to the other, which is awesome because you have all the benefits of no interference, a well-built automatic switch, and then just get a 1-foot SCART cable to connect it to the other one, and then the newest G-SCART will handle all of the sync stripping and all of the processing like that. So if you were looking to get a second one of those anyway, that's a great solution. If you weren't looking to get one of those, then look into the other things that I talked about, because there's no use spending a lot of money on something that you wouldn't need. But if you do need it, this is a pretty awesome solution because you have a bunch of things all taken care of at the same time. The Remora wanted to know if certain games were compatible with PlayStation optical drive emulators. The game mentioned is Monster Ranger, but I think you mean Monster Rancher. And I happen to have my PlayStation 1 that has the PS1 Digital and X-Station installed, and both of the Monster Rancher games worked. They both booted, they both started the gameplay. I didn't spend a lot of time with them, but it didn't seem to have any issues. And in fact, I've never had any issues with the X-Station. All of the games I've tested, including the team that's worked on it, have had great success to the point where it's pretty much 100%. And if it's not 100% compatibility, it's very much nearing it. So I would certainly get one of those if you have a compatible PlayStation. And question 2, do you have a recommendation for a component-only Switch? I'm currently leaning towards the Otaku, but wondered if there was another option. I'm obviously a giant fan of the G-Comp switch, so if you were looking for 8 inputs and 2 simultaneous outputs, that's definitely the best new solution at least. But a lot of people just don't need those extra features, so the Otaku would work. A lot of older switches that used to be really expensive, high-end equipment that you could find on eBay now work well. Extron crosspoints certainly are good ones to use. You just have to buy some BNC to RCA converter connectors. And there's other brands out there I've seen. I think I had an Audio Authority one that worked great as well. So if you're looking for new and the best, get the G-Comp switch. If you're looking for cheaper, I would either look into used options, or the Otaku seems to be a great option as well. And it's pretty much just kind of look for whatever features you need. 1 million inputs, dual output, or just a basic switch to get a couple in and a couple out. But definitely check eBay for some of the used stuff. Steinholm has a question about 480p running over sync on green on a modded original Xbox. They said they've been Googling like a madman but can't seem to find any details on how it's done. All I've found in forums is that it can be done with a custom BIOS, but no one seems to know how or where one can get a hold of such BIOS. Do you have any suggestions? I'm using an RGB SCART cable from Retro Gaming Cables. I've never tried this myself either. I think it was Phone Dork that first taught me about this, and I kind of heard the same thing. I believe the custom interfaces like EvoX and stuff like that probably have things like this built in as well. So I think it's a combination, and I could be very well be wrong about this, but I think it's a combination of at least having a soft modded Xbox, having a dashboard that supports something like this, and I don't know about any kind of patches to the BIOS at all. So if anybody has any sources for where to get information like this, I think that would be a really cool thing. Even if it's like scattered information that I could put together and create an easy guide for how to do it, I would really like to do stuff like that, because that's one of the things that people had mentioned over the years that I think a lot of people might want if they have existing SCART setups. So just to be clear, like we were talking last week and earlier about the PS2 and sync on green. If you have a component video setup, there's no reason to mess with any of that stuff. Just load up the console like normally, use component video, and you're done, and you're not going to gain any quality over one or the other. However, if you already have an existing SCART setup, and especially if you're going into something like the OSSC that could handle all of these different signals and all of the resolutions, it's way easier to just run sync on green, run everything through the same switch, and then let the OSSC or your display switch between them. So it's certainly not a solution for everybody, but if you have a 480p compatible SCART solution, then it probably is the easiest way. So I would love to do some kind of video on it, or even just a basic guide on how to get it working. I just haven't had any solid info myself. So if anybody knows where to go, please let me know. Raz Tony whatever said this might be a pretty basic question, but I can't find the answer. Since the G-Comp 8x2 splits the signal into two outputs, does that introduce any input lag? I know the switch portion wouldn't, and I know you showed that in your older 4x1 video, but I'm not familiar enough with how the splitter portion works. I finally got a CRT with component input and would love to output that to that and an OSSC at the same time. Excellent question, zero lag, and in fact, anytime you're using some kind of analog chip to do something like this, it should be zero lag, because while I'm going to oversimplify, what essentially you're doing is sending the output of, the component video output in this case, to some kind of video distribution amplifier that just takes that signal and then amplifies it so that multiple devices can pull from that signal at the same time without hurting anything. So if you were to, for example, take a bunch of Y splitters and take the component video output of a console and send that to two devices, the immediate result would be everything's dimmer. But the more important thing that you would be doing is probably taxing that chip that's built into the console too much and would eventually burn it out. So switches like the G-Comp that have the video distribution amp built into it, you don't have to worry about this, but all that's doing is amplifying the voltage of the signal and taking the signal draw away from the original console. It's not doing anything that would add lag. So while I oversimplified for time, it was probably also more information than you were looking for. Nope, those things do not add lag whatsoever, but that was a good question. DW623 wanted to follow up from a few things from last week. First, thanks for answering that question about FPGAs and replicating disk-based consoles. I did erroneously think it had to do with just the disk drive and not the rest of the system. No problem. I'm glad to clarify it, and it was a very good question, because that's one of those things where if you had never heard the answer before, how could you ever know the answer to that? So excellent question. I'm glad I was able to clarify it. The other was a follow-up about the Shanty Game Boy Color cartridge from Limited Run Games. DW found somebody on Twitter who, kind of brashly called them out about getting specs on this stuff. And Limited Run kind of deflected to what appeared to be somebody who's involved in making the cartridges. I don't know anything about it. I'm just surmising it from the tweet, which is never, it's never the full story. It's always jammed into whatever characters you could fit. And I hadn't had time, and I don't know if I'm going to have time to talk to Limited Run Games about this, but, stuff like this is kind of rough because you have to rely on a bunch of different factors to make sure that these cartridges are done correctly. So first they have to be designed properly, and then you have to find a manufacturer that's going to make them to your specs and not just say yes, but then make it their own way to save money and assume that you won't know the difference. And then you need to make sure that any follow-up runs or anything like that adhere to the same specs of it. And those are not details that I would imagine the people running the Limited Run Games Twitter account to know. And I do not mean that as an insult. I mean that in their defense. So I certainly wouldn't have done that on Twitter. If I have time, I'll email and just ask all of those questions. Hey, how do you vet this stuff? How do you rely on it? How do you guarantee that you're selling good stuff or not? But, that's a very good conversation to have. And that's something that I think I really hope that all of their answers are positive, and I also hope that they would take the time to brag about stuff like that, because any company of any size that takes the time to make sure that their products are done correctly, any product at all, should be proud to talk about that and should make that part of their marketing stuff. Even if they jam it in on their webpage in a tech specs tab that most people won't click on, it's still something that me personally would feel is an important thing to talk about. So maybe it's something that's worth bringing up to them, a little bit more polite than that tweet, I guess, but and remind them of that. Remind them of, hey, when you're not just selling discs, you need to actually talk about this other stuff, and it really will be in your benefit to do so if you're doing it right anyway. So just kind of my thoughts on it. But, hopefully they're taking the steps to have a quality product, because I feel like when you're buying something like this, like a limited edition, repackaging, you're going to want the best quality of stuff. And very often from other companies, not limited run games, I have seen garbage cartridges, garbage boxes, terrible manuals, and it's very annoying that people get scammed with this stuff. And I don't see limited run games doing that, but once again, I'd like to see the opposite. I'd like to see them brag about how good the quality is. Photosfiend wants to know how the RetroTink multi-format works on VHS, and he plans to test it. So I don't have a VCR here that's in storage, but I did test with a DVD player outputting composite video, and I can say that the comb filter on it works really well and better than the other tinks. So I just did that post on RetroRGB about it. You could read a lot more about it because I spent like a day, actually spent a couple days working on that, to be honest. But to summarize it here, specifically talking about VCRs, VHS, and pretty much any video signal that you could send it through composite video, or I guess even S-video. If you're on a TV, so if you're asking how it looks going to a TV, set any of the retro tinks to pass-through mode. The comb filters are still active in pass-through mode, and it'll give a great signal. And yes, you're sending 480i to your TV, but your TV's deinterlacer is going to be decent enough, and you don't have to worry about lag because it's a video signal, not a TV signal. Also, if you're going into a capture card, that's the only time it gets tricky. If your capture card can accept a 480i signal over HDMI, that's still exactly the way that you would want to do it, and everything's fine. But if your capture card will only accept 480p or no interlace signals at all, what you would have to do is run it in the standard Bob deinterlace mode, which isn't the best choice for video. And on top of that, you could, I guess, put scan lines on, but at the same time, most capture cards don't react well to scan lines. They don't capture the video correctly. It just looks weird. So from a watching it on TV point of view, it's absolutely awesome with all composite video sources because of the comb filter. The other tinks do a good job, but the M does a great job with composite, especially in pass-through mode. And in fact, you could even use that with games. So if you had the M in pass-through mode with composite video, you could then send that to the OSSC to have a much cleaner, upscaled signal. Which is, it's still composite video, but that might be a benefit. So I guess the short answer is the RetroTink multi-format would probably work amazing on all video signals in pass-through mode, as long as whatever device you're sending it to is compatible with 480i. Casey McGinty said they just recapped and jailbar fixed a PC Engine Core Graphics 2 that they recently purchased. They combined it with an SSD S3 through an open source scan converter and tried to calibrate with the 240p test suite, but in all modes I'm getting horizontal interference that slowly rolls up the screen. What do you suggest to resolve this? My only guess is the aftermarket PSU is bad, but could it be something else? I made a small video to try and show the issue. I haven't watched the video yet, but if you're using an aftermarket power supply, that's 99.9% the problem. I have seen other things before, but this is one of those scenarios where you'd want to get one of those triad power supplies from Castlemania. Or if you're not in the US, or if shipping's not great, check out that post I did on it, and it'll give you the DigiKey part numbers, and you should be able to get those power supplies worldwide. And, that's absolutely the first thing I would test. And that's a very, very common side effect of a bad power supply. If you get one of the triads and you still have that rolling noise, you could try replacing the 7801 the DC to DC power supply on the inside. Also try making sure that everything's plugged into the same power strip. So plug the core graphics, the OSSC, and your display into one power strip, into one slot on the wall. That's something that I've only experienced that with Nintendo Wii's, but it is a problem I've seen, which I'm not even sure if that's what solved the issue, because I was kept trying a few different things at once, but that is definitely something I've seen before. And Renee, I believe, tried to explain this to me years ago, and I either completely forgot or never really understood it in the first place. So yeah, definitely start with the aftermarket PSU and kind of go from there. And I mean, the good and the bad on that too is even if your current aftermarket PSU is fine, it's not something I would want to chance. I mean, you have a core graphics 2 that's been recapped, so it's already, it's already a console that you spent a lot of time on and invested a bunch of money in. And then you have the very expensive SSD S3. So even if the problem turns out to not be the power supply, I wouldn't trust anything unless it's been vetted by members of the community, or I guess if it's an original one, but I would use the triad in this case and go from there. So hopefully that points you in the right direction, but that's definitely the place to start. Everett wanted to follow up on our discussion from last week about the MCable and how it works in 480p mode, and they posted a bunch more pictures of what looks like GameCube games, absolutely showing a difference in 480p mode. So, thank you for taking the time to do this, and especially thank you for your very level-headed and nerd-based post, which is not something you see often involving the MCables. Everett was just pragmatic and said, here's my findings, here's where I think they could deliver more, here's where I think they do a great job, and this is the type of nerdy discussion I love to have. And, like I said last week, my experience with the MCable was predominantly Xbox, PlayStation 2, and retro stuff through scalers. So, I mean, this is awesome. Now, I'm going to take another look at GameCube through this. And based on your findings, it looks like it really would be a pretty cool thing for GameCube, depending on the game you're playing. But, I mean, you've shown some pretty convincing examples. So, thanks for taking the time to do that. It is just... if I were a better person, I probably would leave off this ending, but I just got to say that it's always hilarious to me, the legions of trolls that come out every time I mention the MCable. Clearly not you ever, this is obviously, I'm not talking about you and your level-headed post that I learned from. I'm talking about every time I mention it, it's either, you're lying, that stuff's snake oil and you're just a shill, which is hilarious because that company hates my guts. They made it incredibly clear to me at PAX, like legit eye rolls and huffs when I walked up. And when I finally was just polited my way through the conversation, one of them tossed a business card at me like, if you want questions, go to there. Like, they hate me. So to call me a shill because of that is so freaking funny to me. By all means, it's definitely not snake oil, and I've never said it was. And I've always defended them against those trolls. And then there's the other side where every time I say this thing is useless to me in these situations, there's a whole bunch of people that bombard me with like, no, that's absolutely not true. You just hate the company because I don't know. And this other YouTuber with more followers than you said that it's a great cable, so you're lying. For obviously, once again, Everett, that is not you at all. Was not you last week. Sure as heck isn't you this week. And I probably shouldn't even been talking about this at all because I probably just seem like a complainy whiner, but it cracks me up the moment you say MCable. You just invite a legion of people to come and just hate on you for it. And I refuse to stop talking about it. A lot of people ask me to talk about it. I think it's so useless in so many situations, but I think it's very cool in so many others. I guess GameCube now, I'll definitely start keeping a more open mind about the GameCube side of things. So no, if people want me to talk about it, I have one here, so I'm going to keep talking about it, and I'm just going to ignore every troll that comes at me for it. So, as far as the Q&As and everything go, if you have any more comments or questions about it, you'll get the same level-headed answer that you've gotten every other time anybody's asked about it. And I'm not always right, and I always really try to to learn from that and correct it when I'm wrong. It's actually very easy for me to be wrong. It's like, okay, here's what I said. Here's why I got it wrong. Here's how I'm going to do it different in the future. Let's all move together as nerds. So, sorry for my mini rant here, but it's just, I'm very appreciative when I have comments like Everett's that are just, your opinions mixed with facts to back it up in a very level-headed manner. And it's just fun to see that in the context of the MCable, because I don't usually get that. Adam Cameron wanted to know if the current version of the SSDS3 has all of the community fixes installed to address video and audio issues. So the short answer to your question, yes, absolutely, and it has for years now. So there's a good chance that even if you picked up a used one, it would still be one of the newer revisions and you wouldn't have any of the issues. There are other things that I need to mention, though. First, if you have any of the PC Engine or Core Graphics systems, they will all have some kind of jailbar interference on the analog video outputs unless you do the 2 capacitor replacement. That has nothing to do with the SSDS3. That is any single analog video output solution. So I just wanted to say that, so if you bought a brand new one, plugged it into a Core Graphics, and you get jail bars, I just wanted to make sure your expectations were set on that. And also, there have been some people that have done some deep audio analysis of this and said that if you bypass the audio on the newer ones with the old audio bypass board, it's a tiny bit cleaner. I don't know if I would ever recommend doing that unless you're a serious audiophile. It's my opinion that in the versions that I've tested, it was absolutely fine. I would not have a complaint about it. Certainly wouldn't call it noisy or anything like that. But I just wanted to mention that as well, because whenever I say stuff like this, there's usually somebody in the comments that wants to chime in and say, well, actually, with this and that, and that's cool. I love facts, but I want the facts presented in the correct context. And if you're just talking about, am I going to buy a product that looks and sounds good? Hard yes, absolutely. But if you really are an audiophile and you do care about all these tiny little differences, and you have a $100,000 stereo, or you got $10,000 headphones and a $3,000 headphone amp and stuff like that, then yeah, you might actually want to look into the different ways to improve the audio on that. But if you're already that person, you probably already have an audio chain where all of these little things do matter. So once again, to answer your question, do all of the SSDs have the fixes installed? Yes, they have for years. Just make sure you understand the nuances of the PC Engine and TurboGrafx, and that if you want to tweak it even more, you could, but I personally wouldn't think it was necessary. A few questions from Elmer M. First, do you know anything on how to fix or reverse image retention on OLEDs? My LG is starting to show. My personal experience with image retention is just watch TV or a movie, and by the time that's over, even a 20-minute TV show, the image retention's been gone. Burn-in, I don't think there's a way to fix it, and you could try things like most TVs have that setting that you could turn it on to that flashes different colors on the screen to try to get rid of image retention. But for me personally, on my 2016 OLED, I get image retention all the time. It lasts minutes, if that. And then once you start, the biggest one for me is I have an Oppo Blu-ray player, and the opening logo is an all black screen with all white lettering saying Oppo. And whenever I start the movie, for the first minute of the movie, you could still sort of see the words Oppo on the screen. And then it goes away immediately. So just watch TV, and if it doesn't go away for that, contact LG and see, is yours defective? Did you really just get burn-in? But I've had great luck with mine. Second question, would you happen to know if the ship has sailed for availability on the Game Boy Advance Consolizer? I'd love to get my hands on one. As far as I know, they're still trying to build them, and they're still trying to keep up with demand that it's really high, and they're just not able to keep up with it. So I hope they're able to figure out some kind of way to get these kits out to people faster. But as far as I know, there's no plans on stopping that project at all. Lastly, I've invested in modding my consoles and slowly seeing my retro setup turn more HDMI-centric. My typical setup for retro consoles is SCART and component. For the newer consoles, I just use a basic 4-in HDMI switcher, but now with the new add-ons plus more mods coming and getting a PS5, I need a better HDMI solution. TVs come with a few ins, and switchers I've seen also come with a few. We've also had HDMI gadgets in TV and movies and gaming since 2005. You'd think companies would make more robust devices. We're bound to run out of space eventually. Any thoughts or ideas would be great. My luck with HDMI switches has been terrible. When you're sending it standard signals, stuff out of a Blu-ray player or a TV box or something like that, streaming stick, whatever, they're fine. But as soon as you start sending them weird retro gaming signals, most of them freak out in one way or another. And to be honest, even the ones that I send just standard signals to, the ones that have had audio breakout and dual output always screw up for me. There's always some kind of audio issue or switching issue or whatever else. So I would check out Dirk Swizzler's post on Shmups about their HDMI equipment. There's a bunch of people there that have been chiming in and keeping that updated as to what's the newer stuff coming out that's been working for them. I really, really hope that somebody in the retro gaming scene sits down and makes an HDMI switch, and especially something stackable. Like imagine if there was an 8-port switch, but with like an expansion port on the bottom, like the original NES or something, where you could then stack it on top of another one to make it a 16 and stack it on top of another to make it, and just continue up with that. I'd love to see something like that. And I'd also love to see it handle signals properly, in which you don't have to worry about what's going to happen to your setup if you switch between, like for me, one big issue is switching between OSSC modes. I'd very often have to switch the mode, unplug the HDMI switch, plug the switch back in, switch the mode again, so hopefully there's somebody working on it. And I've been bugging my friends about this too. Hopefully somebody's listening and will make it. But the other problem is when you make something in runs like this, even if you thought this was going to be a super popular product and you made a run of 5,000, these things that you see on Amazon are probably made in runs of 50,000, which is why they could be so cheap. So the other question is, if somebody spends the insane amount of time and effort making something like this, would it still sell if it was $100? For me personally, that's an absolute yes, just because I've seen the alternatives, but I don't know. So hopefully it could be done, and hopefully it's in the midst of being done. But for now, for HDMI switches, check out Dirk Swizzler's post and see if there's anything there that fits your needs. Well, that's it for this week. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what to do about the Q&As and where to put them to best help the algorithm, or how to do them, or whatever else. But for the short term, at least, nothing's going to change in the fact that any question at all that you have, just please ask wherever the latest Q&A post is, wherever it is that you support. And if I ever miss your question, it's always an accident. It's either because the question came in after I started recording, or I did something silly like accidentally delete it in post or something like that. So anyway, as always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these, and thanks so much for your support, because none of the work that I'm involved in could ever happen without it. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week.